Owen Reeves woke up at 5:30 a.m. to the familiar beeping of his alarm clock. As usual, he rolled over and reached for Lydia's warmth, but found only cool sheets. She must have got up early again. He got himself out of bed and patted his way to the kitchen. The coffee maker was already brewing a fresh pot. There was a yellow sticky note on the counter, reminding him of an early meeting. "See you tonight," Owen thought, frowning as he poured himself a cup. These early mornings were becoming more frequent as he sipped the bitter liquid. He noticed Lydia's favorite mug in the sink, with a hint of red lipstick on the rim. She never wore lipstick to work before. The front door opened, and Lydia rushed in, her heels clicking on the floor. He heard her footsteps on the hardwood floor and called out, "Oh, you're up." "I forgot my presentation notes," she replied, her voice slightly breathless. Owen leaned against the counter and took in her appearance. She was wearing a new blouse that clung to her figure and was form-fitting and low-cut. Her hair was styled differently, and yes, that was definitely red lipstick. "Big meeting," he said. He nodded, looking through some papers on the dining room table. "If it goes well, I'll get a promotion. I found what I've been looking for and put it in my briefcase. Don't wait up tonight. There'll be drinks with the team after to celebrate or commiserate." As she climbed in her car and sped away, something fell off, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. Later that day, Owen stood on the scaffolding of his latest project, overseeing the installation of support beams. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was Derek. "Hey man, got a minute?" Derek's voice was tight and uncomfortable. "What's up, Owen?" he asked, stepping away from the noise. "Look, I don't want to cause trouble, but I saw Lydia last night." Owen's grip tightened on his phone. "Yeah, where at?" "Sheep. You know that fancy French place downtown?" Owen's jaw clenched. They talked about trying that. It was too expensive for a regular night out, so it was a bit out of the question for a regular night out. She wasn't alone. Owen felt like the world was tilting beneath his feet. Who was she with? Derek. He hesitated. A tall guy, dark hair. They looked close. Owen's free hand curled into a fist. "Thanks for telling me, Derek. I got it." He ended the call, his mind racing. It could be innocent, a work dinner, a client meeting. But deep down, he knew. He'd seen the lipstick, the new clothes, the constant meetings and late nights that evening. Owen sat in the darkened living room, waiting. It was nearly midnight when he heard Lydia's key in the lock. She stumbled. Lydia came in, giggling to herself. She was a bit startled to see Owen, and asked how his meeting went. Owen replied that it went well and congratulated her on landing the account. Lydia's smile faltered for a moment, and she said that it must have been some celebration. Owen stood, closing the distance between them. He could smell alcohol on her breath, mixed with a cologne that wasn't his. "You smell nice," he said softly. Lydia took a step back. "I should get to bed early. I start tomorrow," she said, turning to leave. Owen grabbed her wrist. "Who is he?" Lydia froze, her back to him. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me," Owen growled. "I know something's going on. Who is he?" Lydia wrenched her arm free, turning to face him. "You're being paranoid, am I?" "Owen, you're being paranoid. It's the late nights, the new clothes, the secrets. Do you think I'm stupid? I think you're jealous." Lydia spat. "I'm finally doing well at work and you can't stand it. You want me to be that little housewife, don't you? You always want me to be available." Owen reeled back as if he'd been slapped. "That's not fair, Lydia. I've always supported you." "Have you ever thought about your career?" She laughed bitterly. "Have you just tolerated it because it didn't interfere with your life?" They stared at each other, the air thick with tension. Finally, Owen spoke. His voice was low and dangerous. "If you're not happy, Lydia, there's the door. But don't you dare accuse me of holding you back." "Back?" Lydia's eyes widened, filling with tears for a moment. Owen thought she might confess or apologize, but instead she turned on her heel and stormed upstairs, slamming their bedroom door behind her. Owen sank onto the couch, his head in his hands. He'd known something was wrong, but hearing Lydia lie to him. His face made it all too real and unbearable the next morning. Lydia was gone before Owen woke up. He went through his day in a haze, replaying every moment of the past few months in his head. How long had this been going on? How had he missed the signs that evening? He decided to follow her. He parked down the street. From the bank, Owen watched his employees file out at closing time. Lydia emerged, looking around furtively before hurrying to her car. Owen followed her carefully, his heart pounding as she pulled into the parking lot of an upscale hotel. A man was waiting for her, leaning against a sleek sports car. He was tall, dark-haired, and wearing an expensive suit. Owen watched as Lydia practically ran to him, throwing her arms around his neck. The man, Nick, would later learn, kissed her deeply before opening the passenger door for her. Owen gripped his steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. He wanted to jump out and confront them both. But a part of him that was cold and calculating held him back. This required careful planning. He'd make them pay. Days passed, and Owen said nothing. He watched Lydia lie, watched her sneak around, all while playing the role of devoted husband. He gathered evidence in the form of photos and text messages that he'd surreptitiously copied. From her phone he was building a case. He was biding his time, waiting for the moment he'd bring it all crashing down. The breaking point came on a Friday morning. Owen was in the kitchen when Lydia bustled in with an overnight bag in hand. "I'm heading out for the weekend," she said, not quite meeting his eyes. "Girls' trip with some friends from work." Owen nodded and took a sip of his coffee. "Have fun," he said mildly. Lydia hesitated, then added, "My friend Nick is giving me a ride to meet the others. He's outside now. Do you want to meet him?" The mug in Owen's hand cracked as hot coffee spilled over his fingers. He set it down carefully and turned to face his wife. "If he comes within a meter of this house, I'll break his jaw. And if you leave with him now, you'll regret it for the rest of your life." Lydia paused, taking a step back. "Owen, I get out." It looked like she was about to argue, but then she lifted her chin and walked out the door, looking defiantly back at Owen. He watched her climb into the waiting sports car as they drove away. He pulled out his phone and dialed Derek. "It's time. Let's take them down." Owen sprang into action. He pulled out his phone and called Hayes' office. A crisp voice answered, "This is Owen Reeves. I need to speak with Mr. Hayes immediately. It's about initiating divorce proceedings." There was a pause, and then the voice said, "Mr. Hayes has an opening in an hour. Can I take a message? You make it, Owen?" He glanced at his watch. "I'll be there in 45 minutes. Owen sat across from Riley Hayes, a tough divorce lawyer known for getting results. Mr. Hayes began leaning back in his leather chair. "Tell me why you're here," he said. "My wife is. She was cheating on me. I want her to pay for it." Hayes nodded, his expression neutral. "You have proof?" Owen pulled out his phone and slid it across the desk. "Everything's there, photos, text messages, hotel receipts. I've been gathering evidence for weeks," as Hayes scrolled through the phone. "This is comprehensive." "You've," Owen said, his voice hard. "I've already done half my job for me. I want it all." He wanted the house, the savings, everything. He didn't care what it took. "Hey, set the phone down. I'm going to study Owen. It won't be easy. Pennsylvania is an equitable distribution state, but with this evidence, we might be able to argue for a more favorable split. Are you prepared for a fight?" Owen leaned forward, his eyes cold. "I'm prepared for a fight over the next few hours." Hayes hatched a plan. They would move swiftly, cutting off Lydia's access to their joint accounts and gathering more evidence of her infidelity. "What about her lover?" Hayes asked Nick. Owen shook his head. "He doesn't know much about him. He's a lawyer, and he's married. I think we can use that to our advantage. We need to find his wife. We need to know exactly what kind of man she's married to." As Owen left Hayes' office, he felt a grim satisfaction. The plan was in motion. It was time to set the stage for Lydia's return home. Owen methodically packed up her belongings, clothes, jewelry, personal items. By nightfall, the house looked as if Lydia had never lived there at all. Just as he was taping up the last box, his phone rang. It was Derek. "Hey man, how are you holding up?" Dirk's voice was thick with concern. "Owen, I'm fine. I've just finished packing up her stuff." "Dirk, you're really doing this?" "Owen," she made her choice. Owen hesitated. He didn't want to face people and have to explain, but he realized he had nothing to be ashamed of. He wasn't the one who had broken their vows. "You know what, I'll be there in 20 minutes. The bar was crowded, but Owen spotted Derek and a few other guys from the construction crew. At a corner table as he approached, conversations hushed. "Oh," Derek called. "He wants me to grab a seat." "Man, Owen slid into an empty chair, nodding at the others. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Finally, one of the guys, Mike, spoke up. "So is it true about Lydia?" Owen took a long pull from the beer Derek had pushed his way. "Yeah, it's true," Mike said. "I'm sorry, that's rough. Don't be sorry. Be glad you're not in my shoes or hers," Owen said. The guys exchanged glances. "What are you going to do?" Tom asked. Owen set his beard down with a thump. "I'm going to take everything, the house, the money, her reputation. By the time I'm done, she'll wish she'd never met me." A heavy silence fell over the table. Derek cleared his throat. "You sure about this, son? I mean, I know she hurt you." But Owen's eyes flashed. "What do you think I should do? Should I forgive her? Pretend it never happened?" Derek held up his hands. "No, man, I've never seen you like this. It's not like you. The old Owen died the moment Lydia decided to move on with another man. This is who I am now, and if any of you have a problem with that, you can join her on my list." The other men shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke up. Owen drained his beer and stood up. "Thanks for the drink. I've got work to do," as he walked out of the bar. He could feel their eyes on his back. Let them stare. Let them whisper. He didn't care what anyone thought anymore. Morning? Owen was at the bank as soon as it opened. He went up to the teller with a determined look on his face. "I need to freeze all the joint accounts I share with my wife, Lydia Reeves," he said, sliding his ID across the counter. The teller was a young woman with a nervous smile. She tapped at her computer. Mr. Reeves, that's a pretty big request." "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," Owen replied. "I need it done now. I'll need to get a manager." A man in a crisp suit approached Mr. Reeves. "I'm Mr. Johnson, the branch manager. Is there a problem?" Owen fixed him with a steely gaze. "My wife is cheating on me and I need to protect my assets. Are you going to help me or do I need to take my business elsewhere?" Mr. Johnson's eyes widened slightly, but Mr. Reeves was calm and collected, so he suggested they go in. An hour later, Owen left the bank with a grim smile on his face. Lydia's financial lifeline had been cut. That afternoon, Owen sat in his car outside a modest suburban home. This was the house where Hannah Brenner, Nick's wife, lived. Owen took a deep breath, steeled himself for what he was about to do, and approached the front door and rang the bell. A moment later, a petite woman with kind eyes answered. "Can I help you?" she said. Owen cleared his throat. "Mrs. Brenner, my name is Owen Reeves. I need to talk." Owen said, "I need to talk to you about your husband." Hannah's brow furrowed. "Is Nick okay? Has something happened? He's fine, but you might want to sit down for this." Owen handed her a manila envelope. "I'm sorry to be the one to tell you this, but your husband is having an affair with my wife." Hannah's face grew pale as she looked at the photos inside. "No," she whispered. "This can't be." "I'm afraid it is. I have text messages and hotel receipts," Owen said softly. "It's all there." Hannah looked up at him, tears in her eyes. "Why are you telling me this? I'm about to rain down on both of them. I thought you should be prepared." Hannah's expression hardened. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to make them pay. I'm filing for divorce. I'm going after Lydia's job, her reputation, everything." "And Nick?" "Well, I imagine a cheating scandal won't do much for his career." Hannah was quiet for a long moment. Then, to Owen's surprise, she reached out and squeezed his hand. "Thank you for telling me, Mr. Reeves. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some calls to make." Owen left Hannah's house, feeling a mix of emotions. He felt guilty for bringing pain to an innocent woman, but also felt a fierce satisfaction. The net was closing in. The next few days passed in a blur of legal meetings and financial maneuvering. Owen threw himself into his work, pushing his crew harder than ever. If anyone noticed the change in him, they were smart enough not to mention it. Finally, Sunday evening arrived. Owen sat in the darkened living room waiting at precisely 8:4:30 p.m. He heard a key in the lock. Lydia stepped inside, her weekend bag in hand. She turned on the light and froze, seeing Owen. "Oh," she said quietly. "You're still up?" Owen stood slowly. "Welcome home." Lydia's eyes darted around the room, taking in the missing photos and the empty spaces where her things had been. Things had been fine between them until Owen found out. He cut her off. He knew everything. He knew about Nick and the affair. He knew everything. Lydia's face crumbled. She pleaded with him. She said she could explain. She said she'd been seeing someone else for months. She said she'd lied to his face. She said she was sorry. She said she never meant to hurt him. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I never meant for me to find out. I guess I did, and now you're going to pay for it. Lydia's eyes widened. What do you mean? Owen smiled, but it was a cold, hard expression that made Lydia take a step back. I've frozen our accounts, I'm filing for divorce, and I'm going to take everything. Lydia, the house, the savings, your reputation. I'm taking it all. When I'm done, you'll have nothing. You can't do that, Lydia gasped. Watch me, Owen growled. Oh, and you might want to call your boyfriend. His wife knows too. All the color drained from Lydia's face. No, she breathed. Owen, please. We can work this out. There's nothing to work out, Owen said, moving past her to the door. Your things are in boxes on the porch. I think you should find somewhere else to stay tonight. As he stepped outside, Lydia called after him, her voice breaking. Owen, wait! Where are you going? Owen woke up early, his mind already racing with the day ahead. He'd barely slept, replaying Lydia's tearful pleas over and over in his head. Each time he felt a flicker of sympathy, he reminded himself of her betrayal. His phone buzzed with a text from Derek. You okay, man? I heard Lydia come back last night. He replied, I'm fine, it's done. Meeting with A. As he was getting ready to leave, another text came through. This one was from an unknown number. It was from Hannah Brenner. She wanted to meet. She had something she needed to tell him. Owen was curious, so he quickly replied, arranging to meet Hannah at a coffee shop near his office. An hour later, Owen sat across from Hannah, both clutching steaming mugs of coffee. Hannah looked tired, and her eyes were red from crying. Thank you for meeting me, she said, her voice soft. I wanted to tell you what happened after you left yesterday. Tightening around her cup, Hannah took a shaky breath. I confronted Nick. He tried to deny it first, but when I showed him the evidence, he broke down. He said it was just a fling, that it didn't mean anything. Owen snorted. You believe that? Hannah's eyes flashed. Of course not. I told him I wanted a divorce, and then I called my father. Hannah explained that her father is a senior partner at Nick's firm. She told him everything by that morning. Nick had been asked to resign. Owen's face lit up. He said, You destroyed his career. Hannah met his gaze steadily. She replied, I just returned the favor. They sat in silence for a moment, two people united by shared experience. Owen finally spoke up, thanking her for telling him this. It helped. Hannah nodded and said, I thought you should know, and I wanted to ask how you're handling things with Lydia. Owen's jaw clenched. I'm taking her for everything she's worth. The house, the savings, everything. Hannah said firmly, Make her pay. They parted ways. Owen felt a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't alone in this fight. Later that day, Owen sat in Riley Hayes' office, listening as the lawyer laid out their strategy. We've got a strong case for an uneven split of assets. Hayes was saying that, given the evidence of infidelity and the fact that you've been the primary breadwinner, we should consider an uneven split. Owen cut him off. He said he didn't want an uneven split, he wanted it all. Hayes leaned back in his chair and studied Owen. Mr. Reeves, I understand you're angry, but the courts don't concern me. Owen snapped. I care about making her suffer, whatever it takes. Hay sighed. All right, we'll push for maximum damages. But I need to warn you, this could get ugly. I'm just. Owen stood his ground, eyes cold. It's already ugly, Mr. Hayes. I'm just. Owen was on his way out of the office when his phone rang. It was his foreman, Mike. There was a problem at the site. One of the support beams wasn't up to code. They needed Owen there as soon as possible. Owen muttered angrily. I'm on my way. He threw himself into work, grateful for the distraction. He spent hours poring over blueprints. As the sun was setting, Derek approached Owen, looking concerned. You've been working for hours. Maybe it's time to call it a day. Owen wiped sweat from his brow. I'm fine. There's still work to be done. Derek hesitated, then pressed on. Look, I know you're going through a lot, but running yourself into the ground isn't going to help. If you push yourself too hard, you'll burn out. Owen shot back. You don't know what I'm going through, so why don't you mind your own business? Derek held up his hands. I'm just trying to help. I don't need help. Owen grumbled. "I need people to do their jobs and leave me alone." As Derek walked away, shaking his head, Owen felt a twinge of guilt but pushed it aside. Owen couldn't afford to show weakness. Days turned into weeks. He threw himself into his work with a fervor that impressed and worried his crew. The divorce proceedings dragged on. Each meeting left Owen more determined to crush Lydia. One evening, as Owen was leaving the construction site, he spotted a familiar figure waiting by his truck. It was Lydia. She looked terrible. Her clothes were wrinkled and her hair was disheveled. As Owen approached, he could see that she had dark circles under her eyes. She took a hesitant step forward and said, "Owen, please can we talk?" Owen's face hardened and he replied, "We have nothing to talk about." Lydia reached out and grabbed his arm, saying, "Please just listen. I know I'm messed up. I know I hurt you. But this vendetta is destroying both of us." Owen yanked his arm away and said, "You destroyed us when you. Since then, everything has been your fault." Tears were streaming down Lydia's face. "I'm sorry, God, I'm so sorry. I'll do anything to make this right. Please just tell me what I can do." For a moment, Owen felt his resolve waver. Then he remembered the nights he'd spent alone, imagining Lydia in Nick's arms. "What can you do?" Owen's voice was cold. "You can lose everything, your job, your friends, your dignity. You can feel what it's like to have your whole world ripped away. Then maybe you'll understand what you did to me." Lydia stumbled back as if she'd been slapped. "From Riley Hayes, Mr. Reeves. I have some news." The lawyer said he was excited. Lydia's lawyer got in touch. They want to settle. Owen sat up straighter. "What are they offering?" "The house, the savings, basically everything we asked for." Hayes explained that it seems your wife wants to end this. A slow smile spread across Owen's face. "She's desperate to get this settled. I'll consider it, but we want more." There was a pause on the other end. "Mr. Reeves, this is already a very favorable settlement. If we push for more, it could backfire." "I don't care," Owen said firmly. "I want her to walk away with nothing. Make it happen." As the weeks passed, Owen watched with grim satisfaction as Lydia's life fell apart. He heard it through the grapevine. She'd lost her job at the bank. Apparently sleeping with clients was a big no-no. She was staying with her sister Megan, who made no secret of her disgust with Lydia's actions. One day, as Owen was grabbing lunch at a deli near the construction site, he overheard a familiar voice peering around the corner. He saw Lydia sitting with another woman, April, if he remembered correctly, one of Lydia's Kio workers. "I can't believe Nick did this to you," April said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "After everything you went through," Lydia replied. April patted Lydia's hand and said, "Oh honey, men like that don't love anyone but themselves." Owen leaned in closer, trying to hear better. "I've lost everything," Lydia whispered. "My job, my marriage, my friends. And for what? A man who was sleeping with half the women at the bank." Nick's eyes widened. He hadn't just been seeing Lydia, he'd been playing them all. As he watched, April's expression changed. A sly smile spread across her face. "Not all of us were as naive as you, sweetie. Some of us knew exactly what we were getting into with Nick." Lydia's head snapped up. You and Nick?" April laughed a cruel sound. "Oh, don't act so shocked. Nick and I have been seeing each other for months. Before you came along," Lydia stood abruptly, her chair screeching against the floor. "You knew he was married, that he was seeing me, and that you still had feelings for him." April shrugged and examined her nails. "It's just business," she said. "Lydia, some of us know how to play the game without losing everything." With that, Lydia fled the deli, tears streaming down her face. Owen felt a strange mix of emotions as he watched Lydia's face stream with tears. He felt a twinge of pity but pushed the feeling aside. There was no room for pity in his plan. The final nail in the coffin came a week later. Ed called him with the news. The lawyer said, "It's done. She's agreed to our terms and she's leaving with just her personal belongings." Owen closed his eyes and took a moment to process the news. "It's over. It's over." Hayes confirmed. "Congratulations, Mr. Reeves. You won." As Owen hung up the phone, he expected to feel elated, triumphant. Instead, he felt empty. He wandered. The house was now legally and completely his, but the rooms felt cavernous and echoing with memories of a life that no longer existed. He found himself in front of the mantelpiece, staring at a photo he'd forgotten to take down. It was from their wedding day, and Lydia was beaming, her eyes locked on his as they. Owen danced their first dance as husband and wife for the first time since it all began. He allowed himself to really feel the loss, not just of his wife, but of the future they'd planned together, the children they'd talked about having, and the life they'd dreamed of building. A single tear slid down his cheek. He brushed it away, annoyed. No, he would mourn what Lydia had thrown away. He was better off without her. The next day, Owen threw himself into work with renewed energy. He'd won a major contract to build a new luxury housing development, and he was standing at the construction site. Overseeing the early stages of the project gave him a sense of purpose again. Derek approached with a blueprint in hand. "Hey boss, got a minute?" Owen nodded, grateful for the distraction. "What's up?" Derek explained a potential issue with the foundation plans. Owen found himself truly engaged for the first time in months. This was what mattered. Now that the divorce is finalized, Lydia is fading into a distant memory. Owen is throwing himself into his projects, and his company is flourishing under his renewed focus. One evening, as Owen was locking up the side office, he spotted a familiar figure waiting by his truck. "Was that Hannah?" he said, surprised. "What are you doing here?" She smiled, a hint of nervousness in her eyes. "I hope you don't mind. I heard about your new development, and I wanted to see how you were doing." Owen leaned against his truck. "I'm okay. The divorce is final and work is good." Hannah nodded. And then there was Lydia Owen. I last heard she'd moved out of state and started over somewhere new. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of shared experience hanging between them. Finally, Owen spoke. "I'm glad you're doing well," he said. "You deserved better than what happened to you." Owen met her gaze. "Did you?" Hannah smiled, her expression genuine and brightening her face. "Maybe we both deserve a fresh start," she said. As they stood there, the setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. Owen felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, he felt hope. Since Lydia's betrayal, Owen was ready to move on. He looked at Hannah and smiled. "I could use a break. Let's grab a coffee." Hannah smiled back. "I'd like that," she replied, as he walked away for the construction site. Owen glanced back one last time, seeing the skeletal framework of the new development stood out against the darkening sky. A new beginning rising from the ashes of the old. Owen turned back to Hannah, feeling lighter than he had in months. The past was behind him. The future was uncertain but full of possibility. This time, he'd face it on his own terms.